I was sold as the perfect partner, because nothing in me could ever belong to anyone. The auction hall smelled like disinfectant and money. Glass walls divided us into neat, transparent compartments, each Omega, displayed like a concept car, polished, quiet, and carefully lit. Metal frames hummed softly under the lights. Somewhere above us, climate control whispered, as if the room itself was trained to breathe shallowly. I sat straight, hands folded on my lap, chin lifted just enough to read as cooperative. Calm was a performance I'd perfected. Inside there was a numbness that felt like snow packed into my ribs. Cold, compact, oddly comforting. If you don't feel, you don't crack. Numbers flickered across the glass in front of me. Data points followed, clean and flattering. 0 cycle. No heat cycles. No pheromone spikes. No compatibility risks. No claim locking. The voice of the presenter carried like a scalpel. Subject exhibits complete cycle neutrality. Unmarkable, stable, optimal for long-term partnership contracts. A ripple of interest moved through the room. Predators, all of them, dressed in tailored neutrality. They didn't bare teeth, they smiled with portfolios. I caught fragments of murmured calculus. Return, control, public optics. No one said person. No one needed to. I leaned my head back against the glass and let my thoughts wander where microphones couldn't reach. Perfect, they said. Because I wouldn't need anything. Perfect. Because I wouldn't break. Perfect. Because nothing in me would ever ask to be kept. The first bid landed with a soft chime. Then another, then 3 more. Overlapping. The numbers climbed with polite enthusiasm. I watched them as if they were weather, inevitable, impersonal. I'd been here before. Different hall, same hunger. A woman in a slate gray suit leaned toward the mic. Clarification, she said smoothly. No claim response at all.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
None, the presenter replied. 0 cycle subjects do not imprint. No physiological dependency. No behavioral bonding. A man chuckled somewhere to my left. So, he said, no mess. If I'd still been capable of blushing, that would have done it. Instead, I smiled. Small, distant. The kind of smile that says, you're right. I won't inconvenience you. The bidding slowed. Prices consolidated. Interest sharpened. I felt the familiar weight settle, the moment when I became a conclusion. Then the room shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just tilted. The presenter paused, mid-breath. A final bid appeared on the glass, higher than the rest, clean and absolute. No counter followed. Final offer, the presenter said. And there was something careful in the way he spoke now. DOMINIC VALE. I searched the room out of habit. Found him without knowing how. He stood near the back, half in shadow, hands clasped behind him as if attending a briefing rather than an auction. He didn't look at me. Didn't look at the glass. His attention was angled somewhere else. Already past this moment, already calculating consequences. No smile. No satisfaction. No claim in his eyes. The hammer fell. The sound was dull. Final. Contract approved, the presenter announced. Asset transfer initiated. The glass warmed under my palm as the system unlocked. Somewhere, a file closed. Somewhere else, a future rerouted. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel fear. I felt the old steady certainty settle in my bones. I wasn't chosen. I was acquired. The penthouse was too big. Not luxurious big, not impressively big. Just empty. Space stretched in every direction, like it expected something to fill it, and never quite got around to deciding what. Glass walls opened onto the city, all sharp angles and distant light. The furniture was minimal, deliberate, expensive in the way that refused to show off. I stood near the entrance with my hands clasped behind my back, posture perfect, heart misbehaving. This was usually the moment when rules were reinforced with proximity, when ownership stepped closer, when breath brushed skin, pheromones settled, and my body was reminded of its place. None of that happened. DOMINIC VALE stopped a full 2 meters away from me. He turned, not toward me but toward the city, and spoke as if distance were part of the architecture. You'll stay here, he said calmly. Security is already active. You'll have unrestricted access to the East Wing. The West is private. I waited for the rest. For the unspoken clause. For mine. It didn't come. There will be no marking, he continued, tone even. No physical contact unless necessary. Your safety takes priority over optics. I blinked. Once. Twice. I'm sorry, I said before I could stop myself. Could you repeat that last part? I want to make sure I hallucinated correctly. He glanced at me then. Just a glance. Cool, assessing, not unkind. No marking, he repeated. No contact. I laughed. It slipped out, brittle and surprised. Right, of course. Because that's standard. I'll just put that under rare but appreciated experiences. His mouth didn't twitch. If he found me amusing, it didn't register on his face. You are not required to perform, he said. You are not on display. You will not be touched without consent. Consent. The word landed awkwardly, like a chair placed in the wrong room. I shifted my weight, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands. With myself. So, I said lightly. Just to clarify, this is the most expensive example of platonic ownership on record. If you prefer to frame it that way. Oh, I do, I assured him. Helps with the existential dread. Silence followed. Not heavy. Just present. He didn't move closer to fill it. Didn't assert himself into the space. He stood exactly where he was, as if boundaries were as natural to him as breathing. I'd prepared for commands. For restrictions. For my world to shrink to the width of someone else's patience. Instead, it expanded in strange, unsettling ways. You'll have a schedule, Dominic said. You're free to decline it, meals are optional, medical staff are on call, but nothing will be done without your approval. I stared at him now. You bought me, I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Most people don't lead with freedom after that. His gaze held mine, steady and unreadable. Most people, he said, don't know what to do with something they can't control. Something, not someone. And yet, he inclined his head, a precise gesture. Rest. We'll speak again tomorrow. He turned away before I could respond. Footsteps quiet against the stone floor. No lingering. No claim in the air. I stood alone in the vast, silent penthouse, heart still racing, throat strangely open. This was the first cage that didn't close around my throat. The corporate headquarters smelled nothing like the auction hall. Here the air was warm and neutral, filtered to erase identity. Glass again, always glass. But this time, it wasn't meant to display. It was meant to intimidate. Floors gleamed. Screens whispered data. People moved with the confident efficiency of those who believed the world responded to their schedules. I walked beside DOMINIC VALE without touching him. That alone drew looks. Alphas noticed absence the way sharks noticed blood. No hand at my back. No possessive proximity. No mark. No pheromonal signature staking a claim in the air. Curiosity followed us down the corridor. The conference room doors slid shut behind us with a soft final sound. Inside waited 3 of Dominic's senior advisors and 2 external representatives, alphas all, dressed in power and patience. Their gazes landed on me like measuring tools. Dominic took the head of the table. I was offered a seat, not beside him but across. Interesting. Let's begin, Dominic said. A screen lit up behind him, lines of text resolving into a familiar shape. My file. But the heading made my breath hitch. Strategic partner, NOAA. Not Omega. Not asset. Not companion. Partner. I scanned the document quickly, heart thudding harder with every line. No ownership language. No exclusivity clauses. No behavioral compliance requirements. It was structured like a political alliance. Temporary. Conditional. Revocable. One of the advisors, a tall man with silver at his temples, cleared his throat. Dominic, he said carefully, this classification is unconventional. I'm aware, Dominic replied. You purchased a zero-cycle Omega, another alpha added. The expectation is a claim. Visibility. Stability. I purchased leverage, Dominic said calmly. I looked up at him, sharp and startled. Leverage. The word stung more than ownership would have. Ownership was simple. This was strategy. You're setting a precedent, the silver-haired advisor warned. Others will test it. They already are, Dominic said. That's the point. The external representatives exchanged glances. One leaned back in his chair, eyes flicking to me. You're aware, he said, tone smooth, that without a public claim, your partner here becomes a vulnerability. I smiled before I could stop myself. It wasn't friendly. I prefer strategic liability, I offered. Has a nicer ring. Silence snapped to attention. Dominic's gaze cut to me, sharp, assessing. For a moment, I thought I'd overstepped. Then he said, "Noted." The meeting moved on, but the room had shifted. I felt it in the way eyes lingered, in the subtle recalculations happening behind polite expressions. I wasn't a kept Omega. I wasn't claimed. I was unguarded territory. By the time we left the room, the whispers had already started. In the elevator, Dominic stood beside me, close enough now that I could feel the warmth of him, but still no contact. The doors slid shut. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. "Do what?" "Call me leverage, partner." I swallowed. "That makes me a target." He didn't look at me. "You were already a target," he said. "This just tells them why." The elevator hummed upward. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored wall, composed, polished, furious. I'd spent my life being framed as something manageable, something safe. Now I was a variable. And DOMINIC VALE had put me on the board like a queen no one was allowed to take. The realization settled heavy in my chest, sharp and unwelcome. If I wasn't his Omega, then what exactly was I to him? The underground parking garage was supposed to be safe. That was the lie we all agreed to tell ourselves, the kind reinforced by cameras, keycards, and the false confidence of concrete walls. The air smelled like oil and recycled oxygen. My footsteps echoed too loudly as we walked toward Dominic's car, our shadows stretching thin and distorted under the fluorescent lights. I was still replaying the meeting in my head when it happened. The first sign wasn't movement. It was silence. The hum of the lights stuttered. A fraction of a second too long. Dominic's hand came up, not toward me, but in front of me. "Stop," he said. I did. A van rolled into view at the far end of the garage, dark and unmarked. It moved too slowly. Purposefully. My pulse kicked hard against my ribs. 2 men stepped out. No insignia. No hesitation. My body reacted before my mind did, adrenaline flooding in, cold and sharp. I took a step back, instincts screaming to run, to hide, to shrink into whatever corner I could find. Dominic moved. He didn't shout. Didn't posture. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and the threat with such quiet certainty that it took my breath away. "Stay," he said. One word. Not a command, an instruction, delivered like fact. The first man reached inside his jacket. Dominic closed the distance in a blur. The sound that followed was wet and final. A body hit the concrete hard enough to rattle the air. The second man barely had time to react before Dominic turned, movement precise, brutal. A sharp twist. A choked sound. Then stillness. I stood frozen, heart hammering so hard it blurred my vision. It was over in seconds. Dominic straightened, adjusting his cuff as if he'd spilled something inconvenient. His breathing hadn't changed. His expression hadn't either, calm, focused, already moving on. He turned to me. "Are you hurt?" I swallowed. My mouth felt dry, my limbs buzzing. "No," I managed. He nodded once. "Good." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, security already on its way. Dominic pressed something on his wrist, issuing clipped instructions without raising his voice. Efficient. Controlled. Dangerous. I realized then that I'd never seen an alpha like this. Not loud. Not territorial. Not driven by dominance. This was precision. As security swarmed the scene, Dominic guided me toward the car. His hand hovered near my back, close enough to shield, far enough not to touch. I watched him through new eyes as we drove away. The city rising around us like nothing had happened. My hands trembled now that the danger had passed. I curled them into fists, forcing them still. "You could have let them take me," I said quietly. He glanced at me, brief and sharp. "That would have been inefficient." I huffed a shaky laugh. Comforting. Silence settled between us, not heavy, anchored. The truth sank in slowly, threading through my fear with something steadier. He hadn't panicked. Hadn't hesitated. He hadn't needed to think. He hadn't saved me like a hero. He neutralized a threat. Dominic's private office was nothing like the rest of the building. No screens. No glass walls. Just dark wood, muted light, and a single wide window that framed the city in motion. Night had settled in, draping everything in neon and distance. From up here, the streets looked harmless. Controlled. They weren't. I stood near the window, arms folded tight across my chest, trying to steady the echo of the garage in my bones. Every time I closed my eyes I saw how quickly Dominic had moved. How final it had been. "How many?" I asked without turning. "How many what?" He said. Attempts, I clarified. On me. A pause. I felt it behind me, measured and deliberate. That was the first direct one, Dominic said. There will be others. I turned then. Anger flaring sharp and sudden. You say that like it's, whether, it is, he replied evenly. Predictable, containable. Because of me, yes. The word landed with no cushioning. Honest, unsoftened. Dominic moved closer, not into my space, but enough that his presence filled the room. He leaned a hand on the desk, posture controlled, gaze steady. Zero-cycle omegas disrupt existing power structures, he said. You can't be claimed, you can't be bound, you can't be pacified through biology. I laughed, short and humorless. That's supposed to be a good thing. In theory, he said. In practice, it makes you an anomaly. The city lights flickered behind him, catching in his eyes. For the first time, I saw something there I hadn't before. Not softness, but focus sharpened by concern. Most omegas are controlled through dependency, Dominic continued. Marking creates loyalty, stability, predictability. You don't offer any of that. So they want me gone, I said quietly. They want you owned, he corrected. Or erased. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thinner. I pressed my shoulder to the cool glass, grounding myself in its chill. I thought being unclaimable made me safe, I admitted. Like a loophole. Dominic's gaze didn't waver. It made you interesting. There it was. The truth I'd been circling my whole life. I wasn't desirable because I was beautiful or compliant. I was valuable because I broke the rules. Because I couldn't be locked into the neat systems that kept everyone else in line. A defective part in a perfectly oiled machine. My throat tightened. So what am I to them? I asked. A weapon? A liability? A variable, Dominic said. And variables get studied. I closed my eyes. A wave of something dark and dizzy washing through me. All this time, I'd told myself my zero cycle was freedom. That it meant no one could trap me. But freedom had never been the point. Dominic straightened, stepping back into his usual distance. This is why there will be security, he said. Protocols. Restrictions. A cage, I said. A shield, he corrected. I didn't know which scared me more. As the city pulsed outside the window, the truth settled heavy and unyielding in my chest. Being unclaimable didn't make me free. It made me valuable. Living with DOMINIC VALE was nothing like I'd imagined. There were no rituals. No scheduled intimacy disguised as bonding. No reminders of ownership woven into my day. If anything, the house functioned like a quiet truce between two people, pretending not to notice how carefully they orbited each other. Mornings were the strangest. I would wake to the soft hum of the building coming online, light creeping in through the glass walls, the city stretching itself awake below. The kitchen was always stocked, fresh fruit, real bread, coffee ground too precisely to be an accident. No one announced it. No one commented on what I ate or didn't. The first time I found breakfast waiting, I stood there staring at it like it might explode. You don't have to eat it, Dominic said from across the room, already dressed, tablet in hand. I know, I replied. I'm just suspicious of food that appears without conditions. He paused, considering that. Fair. That became a pattern. We worked in parallel more than together. Dominic's days were a blur of meetings and encrypted calls. Mine were quieter, research briefings. Controlled access to networks, the slow education of being useful without being consumed. I learned quickly. He noticed, but never praised. Instead, he adjusted. When I stayed up too late reading, the lights dimmed automatically. When I skipped dinner, soup appeared the next night without comment. When I flinched at raised voices on a call, he moved the meeting elsewhere the next day. No orders. No acknowledgements. Just accommodations. Once, I caught myself laughing. It was stupid. Some dry remark Dominic made about a board member's talent for incompetence. The sound startled me as much as him. I clapped a hand over my mouth, half expecting to be reminded of my place. Dominic only glanced up, eyebrow lifting slightly. You disagree? No, I said, still smiling despite myself. I just didn't expect you to be funny. Neither did I, he replied deadpan. I learned the cadence of his silences. The way he leaned against the counter when he was tired. The way his shoulders eased when he thought I wasn't watching. Sometimes we shared a room without speaking at all, the quiet stretching comfortable and strange. Dangerous. Because comfort was a gateway emotion. It invited other things in, hope, trust, longing. I caught myself waiting for him. Not for commands or protection, but for presence. For the way the room felt more grounded when he was there. Like the walls knew what they were for. One evening, I found him standing by the window, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled back. The city painted his reflection in fractured light. For a moment, he looked less like a strategy, and more like a man holding the weight of too many decisions. "You're still awake," he said, without turning. "So are you." "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I," I admitted. Silence settled. Not awkward. Companionable. "Why me?" I asked suddenly. The question had been building for days, pressing against my ribs. Why go through all this? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Because no one else would. That wasn't the whole truth. I knew it instinctively. But it was enough to make my chest ache. I realized then that he never stood too close. Never let his hand brush mine. Never used his body to remind me of his power. Not once. It would have been easier if he had. Instead, he treated me like I mattered, as a person, not a prize. Like my boundaries were not obstacles to overcome, but lines worth respecting. That was what broke me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was worse. I was attached. One night, as I lay in bed listening to the distant sounds of the city, the truth settled over me with terrifying clarity. I didn't want freedom if it meant leaving this. I didn't want safety if it didn't include him. I stared at the ceiling, heart tight, pulse unsteady, and understood exactly how precarious I'd become. I was falling for the man who refused to touch me. I found out by accident. That was the cruelest part. Not a confession, not a dramatic reveal, but a fragment of truth that slipped through a crack Dominic didn't know was there. It started with a file. I was in the East Wing, killing time the way I'd learned to. Quietly, carefully, without asking for more space than I'd been given. One of Dominic's secure terminals was still active, a screen left dim instead of dark. I should have walked away. I knew that. I didn't. The document wasn't labeled with my name. It didn't have to be. The keywords were enough. Mate recognition. Confirmed. 0 cycle. Exception case. Risk. Psychological fracture if claimed. My breath stalled. I scrolled. Each line felt like a blade pressed flat against my skin. Not cutting yet, just promising it could. Neurological markers. Instinctual response suppression. Alpha recognition patterns. Everything laid out in clinical precision. And then the timestamp. The assessment had been completed before the auction. Before the glass walls. Before the bids. Before he'd stood at the back of the room, and refused to look at me. Memory crashed in, sudden and merciless. The way his gaze had slid past me that first night. Not indifferent, but restrained. The distance he'd kept, exact and unwavering. The rules. No touch, no mark, no proximity. The garage. His body moving without hesitation. Not fear. Never fear. Protection. My hands began to shake. I closed the file, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and backed away from the terminal like it might explode. Every moment I'd replayed in my head twisted, reassembling itself into something darker. He hadn't been cold. He'd been careful. Dominic had known from the beginning. I found him in his office, night wrapped thick around the city beyond the window. He looked up as I entered, expression shifting instantly, alert, focused. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I laughed. It came out wrong. Thin. Broken at the edges. "That makes 2 of us." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Noah. How long?" I demanded. The word cut through the room, sharp enough to draw blood. He didn't answer immediately. That pause was all the confirmation I needed. "How long?" I repeated, voice shaking now. "Have you known?" He exhaled slowly. "From the first assessment." My vision tunneled. "Before you bought me." "Yes." The floor tilted. I gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. "So every rule I said, each word measured with effort, every line you drew, was intentional," he finished. I looked at him then, really looked. The man who'd given me space, safety, choice. The man I'd started to trust. "You let me think I was disposable," I said quietly. "That I was leverage. A variable." "You were," he said, and there was no evasion in his voice. "And, more." The room felt too small, suddenly airless. "You let me fall for you," I whispered. "Knowing what I was to you." "I didn't let you," he said. "I tried to prevent it." Something inside me snapped. You don't get credit for restraint when you're holding all the power, I said, anger finally breaking free. You don't get to decide what protects me and call it kindness. His jaw tightened, claiming you would have destroyed you. And buying me didn't? I shot back. Silence stretched, taut and trembling. I saw it then, the truth beneath the strategy. The cost he'd calculated and chosen anyway. He'd stepped into the role of owner to keep me alive, knowing exactly what it would cost both of us. That didn't make it hurt less. It made it worse. I backed away, chest heaving, every memory now poisoned with understanding. All this time, I'd thought I was learning to matter. Instead, I'd been managed. I turned for the door, hands clenched, heart breaking in 1,000 precise places. He bought me knowing I was his mate. The room was sealed. Not locked, just closed in the way spaces become when the air itself decides not to let anything escape. The lights were low, shadows stretched thin along the walls, and the city beyond the glass felt impossibly far away. This wasn't Dominic's office. It was one of the smaller rooms, designed for negotiations that required privacy and pressure in equal measure. Fitting. I stood in the center, arms wrapped tight around myself, like I could hold my ribs together by force alone. Dominic faced me from across the room. No desk between us this time. No buffer. Just distance measured carefully, deliberately maintained. You should have told me, I said. My voice didn't break. That almost made it worse. Yes, he said. I should have. That was it. No excuses. No deflection. The calm in his voice scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. You don't get to say that like it's an administrative oversight, I snapped. You don't get to own the truth and decide when I'm ready for it. I didn't decide that, he said. I decided you deserve time without pressure. Pressure? I laughed, sharp and ugly. You bought me. You put a price on my existence and you're calling that absence of pressure? His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I took a step closer, then stopped myself. Do you have any idea what it feels like, I continued, to realize every kind thing you did had a strategy behind it? There was no strategy in caring for you, he said quietly. Don't, I warned. Don't soften this. I'm not, he replied. I'm clarifying. I shook my head, breath coming faster now. You watched me. You let me trust you. You let me think I mattered because I was me. You do matter because you are you. And yet you still signed the contract, I shot back, knowing exactly who I was to you. Silence fell, heavy and charged. Yes, he said at last. The word hit like a blow. I felt the anger crest then, hot and dizzy. So tell me, I demanded, which part of this was for me? The purchase? The rules? Or was I just another problem you solved efficiently? His eyes didn't leave mine. All of it, he said. And none of it. I let out a sound that might have been a sob if I hadn't swallowed it down. You don't get to speak in riddles when you've already broken me. I didn't want to claim you, Dominic said. I didn't want my instincts to decide your future, and you thought buying me would somehow be less invasive? I asked bitterly. Yes. I stared at him, stunned. That's insane. Probably, he agreed. But it was the only option that kept you alive. My hands trembled. You're an alpha. You could have walked away. And let someone else claim you? His voice sharpened for the first time. Someone who wouldn't hesitate. Someone who would break you to make you fit. You don't know that. I do, he said. Because I am one of them. The honesty of that stole my breath. I know exactly what it means to want what I shouldn't take, he continued. And I know what it costs when I do. I felt something crack open in my chest, painful, fragile, terrifying. So you chose for me, I whispered. I chose restraint. You chose control, dressed up as sacrifice. He took a step forward, then stopped himself, hands curling at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was low, steady, stripped of pretense. I would rather lose you than own you. The words settled into the room like ash. I wanted to hate him for them. Wanted to scream, to tear that sentence apart, and prove it was just another calculated line. But I couldn't. Because he meant it. That was the cruelest truth of all. I backed away, shaking my head. You don't get to decide that either, I said hoarsely. You don't get to be noble at my expense. I turned for the door before he could respond. Before I could falter. Behind me the room stayed silent. When the door slid shut, the sound echoed like a severing line. And just like that, We broke. The message arrived the next morning. No warning. No explanation. Just a formal notification delivered with the same clinical efficiency that had defined every other turning point in my life. Contract status. Terminated. Effective immediately. I stared at the screen, waiting for something else to appear. A clause. A footnote. A catch. There was nothing. My access codes dissolved in real time. Security permissions blinked out one by one. Not with hostility, but with finality. Even the air in the penthouse felt different. Less guarded, less claimed. Free. The word should have tasted like relief. Instead, it sat heavy and hollow in my chest. I packed slowly. Not because there was much to take, but because I needed the time. Each folded shirt felt like a small goodbye. Each step through the space echoed louder than before, as if the walls had already started forgetting me. He didn't come to stop me. That hurt more than if he had. By the time I reached the exit, my hands were shaking. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door as if it might say something I wasn't ready to hear. It opened instead. Dominic stood on the other side, expression unreadable, posture precise as ever. No guards. No intermediaries. Just him. "You're free," he said. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "The transfer is clean," he continued. "No residual claims, no surveillance, no obligations." "You planned this," I said quietly. "Yes." I waited for more. For regret. For explanation. For anything that would soften the finality of it. Nothing came. He stepped aside, giving me the space to pass. A clear path. No pressure. No reach. That was his last restraint. I walked past him, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to stop, to turn back, to demand something more solid than freedom. But I didn't. The elevator ride down felt endless. The city swallowed me whole as I stepped outside, the noise and motion overwhelming after weeks of controlled silence. People brushed past me without noticing. No one looked twice. I'd never felt so visible. Or so alone. Hours later, in a small rented room with a view of a brick wall, the truth finally settled in. The silence pressed in, unbroken by security systems or measured footsteps. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands slack in my lap, and felt the fear creep in slow and cold. Freedom didn't feel like escape. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast without a map. And somewhere behind me, a door had closed without locking. He let me go. Freedom was louder than I expected. The city didn't soften just because I was no longer owned by anyone powerful enough to quiet it. It pressed in from all sides. Voices, engines, neon, bodies moving too close without permission or purpose. I learned quickly that safety had been a curated experience. Without it, the world was sharp-edged and unapologetic. I moved apartments twice in the first week. Not because I had to, but because I could. Because no one told me to stay. Because the absence of surveillance made every shadow feel both threatening and thrilling. I slept lightly, senses tuned too high, the quiet of the rented rooms broken by unfamiliar sounds. For the first time, every decision was mine. It was terrifying. And intoxicating. I took public transit instead of armored cars, walked streets without escorts, ate at places where no one knew my name or my file number. No one looked at me like a commodity. No one cared that I didn't smell like an Omega should. They just saw a person. The fear came in waves. At night mostly. I'd wake with my heart racing, convinced I'd heard footsteps that weren't there. Old instincts screamed at me to find a stronger presence. To press myself into someone else's protection. I didn't. I learned the rhythm of the city instead. Which cafes stayed open late. Which corners were well lit. Which people kept their eyes to themselves. I learned how to say no and mean it, how to leave without apology. It felt honest. Still, the danger hadn't disappeared. It had only changed shape. I caught the looks sometimes, too curious, too calculating. Heard whispers that traveled faster than I did. A zero-cycle Omega without a claim didn't vanish just because a contract did. I was still valuable. But now, I chose where I stood. One afternoon, I sat in a crowded cafe. Sunlight warming the chip table beneath my hands. I watched people argue softly over laptops, laugh too loud, exist without thinking about who might want them for what they represented. I let myself be one of them. The fear was still there, coiled and ready. But so was something else. A spark of exhilaration that made my pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with survival. I wasn't protected. I was present. For the first time, my life felt unfiltered. No glass walls, no silent guards, no carefully measured distance. Just choices and consequences, tangled and real. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought lingered, unwelcome and persistent. Dominic had let me go knowing exactly what this world could do to me. That knowledge didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like trust. The city roared around me, uncontained and alive, and I breathed it in, fear and freedom twined together so tightly I could no longer tell them apart. Without a cage, everything hurt more. Without a cage, everything mattered. The warning came too late. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just a shift in the air that made my skin prickle. An instinct honed by weeks of danger and distance. I noticed the man across the street watching me too carefully. The car idling longer than necessary. The way my name moved through a conversation that stopped when I turned my head. I didn't run. That was the first mistake. The second was thinking I was alone. They moved fast, professional, quiet. No insignia, no hesitation. A hand closed around my arm, grip iron hard, yanking me off balance. Panic surged, bright and feral. Easy, someone murmured near my ear. This will go faster if you cooperate. I didn't. I twisted, kicked, bit down hard enough to taste blood, mine or theirs, I wasn't sure. The world narrowed to breath and impact and the scream trapped in my chest. Then everything stopped. Not gradually, instantly. The hand on my arm was gone. The pressure vanished like it had never existed. I staggered, heart slamming against my ribs, and nearly fell, only to be steadied by a familiar presence at my back. Dominic. No suit jacket this time. No distance. His arm was solid around me for half a second. Long enough to anchor, not long enough to claim. He stepped away immediately, already moving, already focused. Leave, he told the men. They didn't. That was their last error. Dominic didn't raise his voice. Didn't posture. He dismantled the situation with ruthless efficiency, movements precise, brutal, final. It was over before I fully registered what was happening. Bodies on the ground, groaning, retreating, neutralized. When it was done, he turned to me, eyes sharp with concern he didn't try to hide. Are you hurt? He asked. I shook my head, breath shaking. You're not supposed to be here. I know. You don't have any rights over me anymore. I know, he said again. That's why I came alone. The words hit harder than any blow. You followed me, I said. I monitored the situation, he corrected. When it escalated, I intervened. Why? I demanded. You let me go. Yes. Then why are you here? He held my gaze, steady and unflinching. Because freedom doesn't mean abandonment. Something in my chest cracked open. You don't own me, I said softly. No, he agreed. You don't get to decide what I do. I don't want to. The street was quiet now, the city moving on like nothing had happened. I realized my hands were trembling. So were his, just barely, fingers flexing at his sides as if resisting an urge. You could have stayed away, I said. You chose not to. Yes. I looked at him, really looked. At the man who had stepped back when he could have claimed. Who had let me walk into danger rather than cage me from it. Who had come anyway without contracts or permissions or leverage. You didn't come to take me back, I said. No. You came to give me a choice. Yes. The fear was still there. So was the freedom. But now there was clarity, sharp and undeniable. I took a step toward him. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I stayed, I said. We didn't return to the penthouse. That mattered. We met instead in places that belonged to neither of us. Public, neutral, alive. A quiet cafe at the edge of the financial district. A park where the city softened into trees and uneven paths. Rooms where there were no contracts embedded in the walls and no security systems humming beneath the floor. We talked. Not about what we'd lost, but about what we were willing to risk. There will be scrutiny, Dominic said once, fingers wrapped around a paper cup, steam curling between us. They'll call it weakness. They always do, I replied. Especially when something doesn't fit. He watched me then, not like an asset, not like a threat. Like an equal considering terms that mattered. No claim, he said. No private ownership. No protection disguised as control, I added. Agreed. I searched his face for hesitation and found none. Only resolve. The announcement came a week later, not dramatic. Not defensive. Just a statement delivered with the same precision Dominic brought to everything else. Noah is not under my claim. Noah acts by choice. Any attempt to treat him as property will be answered accordingly. The backlash was immediate. Analysts speculated. Alpha scoffed. Corporations recalculated. But something else happened too. Quieter, slower, more dangerous. People paid attention. For the first time, I stood beside Dominic in a room full of power, without being framed as his possession. No hand on my back. No signal in the air marking me as owned. Just presence. When questions came, I answered them myself. When looks lingered, I met them without flinching. The world didn't change overnight. Systems never do. But cracks formed. Conversations shifted. The idea took root that an Omega could stand unmarked and still choose. Still matter. Later, when the noise faded and the night settled in, we walked together without hurry. His shoulder brushed mine. Accidental, unclaimed. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. This won't be easy, Dominic said quietly. I know. You can leave at any time. I know. The choice sat between us, open and unguarded. I took it. I reached for his hand, not as a bond, not as a surrender, but as a decision made fully awake. His fingers closed around mine, steady and warm, no instinct pulling tight, no chain locking into place. Just connection. I'd spent my life being defined by what I lacked, by what couldn't be done to me, by the absence of something everyone else relied on. But standing there, unmarked and unowned, I understood the truth at last. I was never meant to be claimed. I was meant to choose.